Hey, how's everyone doing? Jamie McDonald here from EverLast Lighting, sitting down with Bryan Schultz, one of our regional sales managers, for another exciting EverLast webinar. This one's going to be on rebates and the importance of rebates for your customers. So, Bryan, how are you doing today? Good to have you on.
I'm doing great. Staying safe still. Hope everybody out there is staying safe as well.
Yes, crazy times indeed, for sure. So it's good to be able to do this from home and stay safe and sound. Let's just jump right into this. So rebates are one of those things that everybody hears the terms rebates, end users especially hear about rebates, and they're familiar with rebates maybe from stores and things like that, but maybe not on such a big scale like they might see when getting a lighting upgrade to their business. So let's just talk a little bit about some of the rebate options that are out there. And then we'll just kind of build off of that. I know for one of the topics we're going to get into is the complexity of those. And, I dealt with a rebate when I purchased a new furnace 2 years ago. And, it can be a process, but luckily we've got a good team here at EverLast Lighting like you who are super experienced at rebates that'll make this easier. We'll jump into that in a minute. But first, let's just talk about, all the different options for rebates out there. So what are some things that people are going to encounter with rebates?
Absolutely. So the first thing, like you said, people are very familiar with it, and what people love to see is instant rebate. Obviously, you get that at the register. You'll get that in a mail-in form. So something that's very straightforward and easy. What I've seen in the industry is it seems daunting to some people. So when you see a rebate and you start to see a long process, sometimes that can be a deterrent for some. So the first thing I always say is don't be, if you're looking at a lighting project and you hear the word rebate and you start to see these, I think I noted it in one of my blogs there in regards to the process itself. You'll get a application and you'll flip it open and it's going to be 40 pages long. Yeah. While once you start to narrow it down, you'll start to see, it's a very simple and easy process. I think for our local utility, which I fill out a lot of the paperwork for our local customers, it comes down to about 2.5 pages that you're actually filling out. So to take a step back in regards to the different, options that are out there, the most common one we see is going to be a rebate that's based on wattage reduced. So to kind of put that into layman's terms, your current light is 100 watts. Your new light is 50 watts. Therefore, you're going to look at, saving 50 watts per fixture. For instance, our local utility, they pay 30 cents per watt reduced. So all of a sudden you take those 50 watts, you multiply by the rebate incentive that they're offering, and you have a $15 rebate. Also, what to look out for as well, you'll see a lot of utilities. It'll vary state by state, but for instance, our local utility, they also have a kicker or a bonus for using products that are made in that specific state. So for instance, on that side, that $15 rebate, once you start to kick in the bonus of 30%, all of a sudden, you're adding another $4.50 to it. And while that doesn't sound, like a ton, once you start to extrapolate those out into these large lighting projects and you have 100 fixtures or 1,000 fixtures, then all of a sudden you're in the tens of $1,000s in rebates just by, buying local and keeping everything in your state there. So you start to see, in regards to other rebate types there, you'll see prescriptive rebates, and those can be lucrative as well. You'll see in some spots where they're trying to make a real push for energy efficient lighting. What they'll say is, okay, you buy this type of fixture, we'll give you a flat incentive, per fixture there. Say it's, $100 per fixture. And that's just kind of throwing a number out there. Mm-hmm. And in most cases, it's limited to 75% of your project cost. Okay. So you always want to keep that in mind as well. When selecting a fixture, sometimes I'd see people get excited and they'd say, okay, $100 rebate, I'll just go buy a fixture that's less than that, or, right around that amount. So you just want to make sure, again, back to the 40-page document, there's some useful information in there as well. But don't be deterred by it. Usually these packets that you're seeing there that are, showing all your offerings, mm-hmm. essentially are for, everything from HVAC, to your water cooling systems to your lighting. So once you really hone it down and get into the section that you're focused on, it's not as daunting as it may seem.
Well, that's a good thing to know, because it is pretty daunting when you start looking at these packets to get the rebate process started. Like you said, they can look like a book, and really our area, we're focusing on just probably a page or two of information regarding lighting. So definitely a good takeaway from that is to not be intimidated by what looks to be a crazy, overwhelming process. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about the process and maybe some of the timelines involved. Like you led off with, you said people are familiar with the instant rebate at the store. And this obviously isn't an instant rebate, but it might not be as lengthy as you think, or maybe do they need to be prepared for longer than an instant rebate in a store, of course?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So I like to make people aware right up front, because you'll see a lot of companies come in and they'll promise the world. So they'll come in and say, for me, if you're buying the lights from a manufacturer, you're going to pay the full price of the quote that they're providing to you. Mm-hmm. Typically, the process that I see from the time we start the application and then we get to the installation portion to receiving a check is on average anywhere from 2 to 6 weeks. On average, I've been seeing about 3 weeks on that side. So just making the customer aware is because you can also damage relationships that way. When you come in and you tell somebody your project cost, say for instance, your lighting package is going to cost you $100,000, but with these lucrative incentives from the rebate, from your energy company, you could have a project cost after it's all said and done in the $25,000 to $40,000 range. But when you go in with a proposal and you tell somebody, hey, your lighting project's going to cost you, $25,000, that's after you receive your rebate. So all of a sudden you drop your lights at their door and you say, okay, your total is $100,000. Then it can obviously you can see how that can leave a bad taste in somebody's mouth. So making sure that, and for myself, the way I do it is essentially every step of the process, from pre-application to review to final application to what people care about the most is when the check going to be in my hand. So making sure you make the customer aware step by step by step of that process and what it entails, and I guess the pitfalls of it as well. So I just like to be straightforward with everybody. It also helps to avoid awkward conversations in that regard as well.
I'm glad that you mentioned that, because I know I'm well aware of there's a big business around that. I'll just call it what I feel like it is. It's kind of a deceptive practice. There are a lot of quote unquote energy savings companies that go around and they'll come into a business and they'll do an energy estimate or survey, and they'll say, oh, we can save, X amount by swapping out these old lights to new LED lights, and they're only going to cost you this amount. And like you said, there's this misleading information that goes out where they're giving them, the lights are only going to cost this much because they're hearing the post rebate amount. And when you're dealing with one of our lighting agencies that we work with, one of our manufacturers representatives, or if you're speaking with you or one of the other sales managers on the phone directly, it's good that we offer that right up front so that they understand that the end of the rebate process is where they see the savings and the lower lower per fixture cost and things like that. So I'm glad you brought that up. So buyer beware. Watch out for the companies that are trying to sell you the savings up front, not telling you the fact that those savings come at the end when you get your rebate check. Go ahead.
As they always say, it's if it sounds too good to be true, it usually is. So the issue I've run into in that regard is obviously everybody has different business practices and things of that sort.
Sure.
But I've had issues when I come in and I'm using rebates first. So essentially, if my sales pitch is going to be on rebates first, I've had some roadblocks that I've run into. So I'll walk into a facility, I'll say, okay, and I have a plan in place. Your lights are going to be this much. This is going to be your rebate, and I'm going to give you about a 99.999% certainty that you're going to receive that rebate. And I kept going into these facilities, and they'd say, okay, sounds great, and the guy would be kind of a little standoffish. And once you started to dig into it, they can really hurt our industry. When you say buyer beware, our industry can be hurt by that as well. So I'd go into these facilities and they'd say, oh yeah, rebates, that sounds great. And once you start to dig into it, there was a guy that promised them the world 2 years prior. They came in, they did their complete lighting project or HVAC project. It's not always lighting as well.
Sure.
It could be HVAC, whatever it may be. They promised them the world. They got their lights installed. They got paid. And while the process should have been still rolling along to get that rebate, processed and check sent out to the customer, that company disappears. So what happens at that point is they start to get a bad taste in their mouth in regards to rebates in the process itself. And what I also do myself when I fill out these applications and I'm corresponding with the energy companies, the customer is always on those correspondence as well. So say for instance, so there's full transparency as well. So they're seeing exactly what we're sending to them. They're seeing the data points we're sending over to them. And that's just, to me, it's another safeguard. It's another, way just to show them, hey, this process is rolling along, just to make them feel more comfortable. I know, I don't want to say a stickler with money, but also I like to know where money's going and I like to be in the loop on things as well. And, I just kind of like to carry that along and just be transparent with my customers as well.
It's another way to ensure a potential future customer down the road as well. You've garnered their trust by putting them right in the midst of the whole process so they can see exactly what's going on. That transparency is important.
Correct.
That's great. So, I guess let's talk a little bit about how there are some differences in lighting. So I know that DLC and DLC premium listed fixtures, those all play a role potentially in how the rebate dollars work out. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yep. So first of all, regardless across the board, to receive any type of rebate, it's going to have to be DLC listed. I've seen some other programs that haven't been updated in years. You'll see sometimes where Energy Star, sometimes a fixture can be Energy Star rated. And be used in a project and receive the rebates. But we're starting to see that get phased out a little more, whereas DLC has become essentially the standard as well. So when you look at DLC versus DLC premium, what I've seen on some of these projects and some of these energy providers, they'll have two different sets of incentives. So say, for instance, like we talked about earlier with our local utility, 30 cents per watt reduced. You'll want to look and just kind of follow their program. And also when I say, they have this daunting packet, they also, in most cases, have an entire team dedicated to helping you succeed with these rebates as well. So always rely on those guys. And what they can do is they can point out to you, they call them energy advisors. So they can point out to you as well the different options. So back to what I was saying, the DLC standard, and just using random numbers here, obviously this varies state by state, energy company by energy company. But what we've seen is you'll see DLC and then you'll see DLC premium, whereas DLC, obviously it ranges whether it's indoor or outdoor lighting. Your DLC rating will be based on your lumens per watt. So say, for instance, their standard is 120 or 130 lumens per watt. To get the baseline DLC approval. Beyond that, you'll look at DLC premium, whereas what they're looking for is a more efficient fixture. For instance, our HL17B, which is 170 lumen per watt unit, that will most of the time qualify for DLC premium as it exceeds, let's say, 150 lumens per watt. So you want to look at that as well, because that 30 cents per watt reduced incentive, that may increase to 40, 50, or 60 cents per watt reduced. So what they're looking at that case on the energy company where they benefit is in most cases where a standard 130 lumen per watt fixture, you might need 100 watts of, you might be able to go in with a DLC premium fixture like our HL17B that's 170 lumens per watt and go in with a fraction of that wattage. You can go in with 70 watts to achieve the same or more light output. So there's incentives in it for everybody, more energy savings for the customer, a higher rebate amount, and obviously for the energy company, lessen the load on their infrastructure. So
Can you take a second to just kind of walk me through? So let's pretend that I'm the end user here.
Yep.
Can you explain to me the process of what they're going to expect from I guess, they get their quote for the lights. What does the process look like after that? What do they have to do? And then maybe what's going on behind the scenes that you or the manufacturer's representative are doing?
Yeah, so just to kind of run through a standard application that I see, essentially your first page is going to ask about your company name. They'll request a W-9 just to show you're a legit company.
Mm-hmm.
They'll ask for your account numbers, your electric and your gas account numbers, depending on what type of application you're filling out and what services you're looking for as well. The next page on that process for us, and they make it very easy as well. They actually have for instance, our local utility, I keep leading back to them. It's just the one I'm most familiar with.
Sure.
They have a chart that essentially you'll click down, you'll bring in the type of fixture, whether the current light is a fluorescent or it's an HID fixture, or an older technology, halogen, whatever it may be. And then it'll ask for your number of fixtures you currently have. It'll ask for the current wattage of the fixture. And then beyond that, it'll ask, more information on our light, what you're installing, the quantity, the wattage, the type, and then in most cases, a lot of these worksheets they're interactive. It almost works on an Excel format, so it'll extrapolate out, and then it'll actually show you what your incentive will be, and then beyond that, you'll have, like for instance, our local utility. They show we're here located in the great state of Michigan. You'll actually click the Made in Michigan. This just shows a little image of our state. You'll click that and it actually extrapolates out the cost or the increased adder, for that Made in Michigan kicker that we discussed earlier, to try to keep business local as well. The next page, the final page on that, is just certifying, basically saying all the information you have is true. I'll submit that information. Typically it can take, you'll get an approval in some cases in a week. Sometimes it may take 2 weeks. It really depends on workload of the energy company and what they have dedicated toward that as well. At that point, what they'll do is they'll give you a pre-approval. They'll notify you to let them know once the lighting project is complete. And in between that process, again, back to the manpower side of things, they may say, I want to come look at what you have now, just to verify that everything's above board and what you're saying you have and what you say you're getting is correct. So I've seen where they come in, they do their walkthrough, they'll just verify everything's correct. What you'll do then is you'll ship the product out, you'll get that product installed, and then what they'll want to do in that case is come and look at it after the fact. Obviously, we've seen some challenges with the current situation in our country now where they've been doing virtual. So you'll essentially, get on a Zoom call with an energy advisor and just kind of walk through the facility, show them what you have there, just kind of show them some details that they'd request there. So obviously things are changing in that regard, and we're in a unique time right now. But prior to this, and hopefully, post pandemic here, we've seen cases where they'll come out to the facility, they'll just verify everything looks good, get some final signatures on the paperwork there, and back to the process we talked about, anywhere from a week to 4 weeks, 6 weeks, depending on obviously their process and how quickly they move. So, and then, check in their hand at that point. So
nice.
And that's when I consider the project complete, by the way.
So you got me thinking here. So we're talking about process, and one of the things that you mentioned, that can play into the length of the process is their workload. And then that got me thinking, there's probably a certain time of year where the workload might be higher. And I know you always run the risk potentially, I think, of as the year progresses, those rebate dollars tend to thin out, right?
Absolutely.
So is that something where maybe you recommend like a stronger push towards rebates as part of the selling of a package, maybe earlier in the year while those rebate dollars are still there, to avoid potentially losing out on the rebate dollars? Is that something that you do, is mention that?
Absolutely. And what's really cool is you'll see a lot, the ones that we work very closely with throughout the year, they'll actually send you, and some even have portals that can actually show you. They're very transparent. Most of it's, they're very transparent as far as the number of dollars they have to give out during the year. And they can update you. I recently received an email from an energy provider that just said, hey, we're at 75% of our annual, spend in regards to rebates, just to make you aware. So again, like you said, you don't get to June and you promise the world to somebody and they wait a little bit on the project and all of a sudden they say, we're ready to go. And, you go back and say, I'm ready to file this. And all of a sudden they say, oh, sorry, the rebate dollars aren't available anymore.
Right.
So making sure you're aware of it. What's really cool, and back to the process we discussed earlier in regards to pre-application. So say once I submit the pre-application, that reserves your funds.
Oh, that's great
to know.
So
once they receive that pre-application and once the pre-application is approved, that actually counts toward that spend. So say, for instance, they had a $1 million budget and your pre-application comes in and you're requesting $100,000 rebate. That speaks for it, even before the final application is submitted. So it's not the dollar amount they're looking to spend. It's not what they've cut so far. It's what they've reserved. So that's why I always say, even if, and we started this a couple years back, that even if the project was 50% or 70%, 75% a go, we'd actually submit the application in the event that, they did move forward with the project. And also timeline wise, you typically have anywhere from 30 to 90 days for those pre-applications to be finalized.
Okay.
I'm sorry, for the project to be finalized. So essentially, I could fill it out on day 1, and then on day 70, the customer could say, okay, let's go ahead and move forward with this. And then that pre-application is still in place, funds are still reserved, and then from there, then you start to get in a little time crunch because you do have that small window you need to complete it in.
Sure.
But in most cases, if the energy company sees progress on the project, you can start to look at extensions and things like that as well. And always, keep in mind and always verify this with your local provider, because again, it varies state by state. So.
Right. Very good. So it sounds like it's something to maybe keep in mind, as the year progresses, is to, maintain that point of contact with your energy provider to make sure the rebate dollars are still there. And if they do start to dwindle or get a little bit smaller, maybe it's a good thing, like you said, we do regularly, and that is to submit that project to the utility to lock in those rebate dollars so that your end user doesn't miss out on that rebate.
Correct.
Great. Well, I'll tell you what, Bryan, I think we've kind of dished out a pretty good amount of useful information here. And I assume that I have free liberty to say, if any of our reps have any questions, feel free to reach out to Bryan at any time. Bryan has years and years of experience in managing the rebate application process at EverLast Lighting. He's definitely a good asset for not just our company, but of course for yours. Thanks again, Bryan, for stopping by today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jamie. Thank you, everybody.
All right. We'll see everybody soon on our next webinar. You take care.